Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Noir Histoire. I'm Natasha, and in this episode of the Career Interview Series, we'll be hearing from Pierre DeBois, an entrepreneur who was born in Gary, Indiana. As a young boy, Pierre was passionate about cars and dreamed of working on cars when he grew up. Pierre achieved his childhood dream by interning at General Motors during college and working at Ford for 8 years. He later made a major career change after completing grad school and is now the founder of a digital marketing analytics company. Stick around after the interview for key takeaways. We are here with Pierre DeBois, founder and CEO of Zamana. Is that proper
Yes,
pronunciation?
yes.
Joining us for the Noir Histoire Career Interview Series. Thank you for joining us, Pierre.
Thank you for
Uh,
having me today. I really
you,
appreciate it.
you're very welcome. Okay, so let's jump right into the interview. First question, if you could just give us a brief overview of your background, where are you from?
Well, I hail from Gary, Indiana, just outside of Chicago. That's been my hometown. I've lived in a number of different parts of the United States. Spent time in Detroit, spent a little bit of time in Pittsburgh, a little bit of Atlanta, a little bit of Huntsville. But Gary has been home, my hometown, and I'm currently going back and forth between Gary and Chicago, working with clients in the Chicago area and across the country.
Perfect. And so tell me a little bit about growing up in Gary. What were your interests like as a kid? And where'd you attend school?
When I was a kid, my interest was definitely a little different than what I am now. My interest was in automobiles. I
Okay.
was known for making cardboard cars when I was a little boy. Went to Tolleson Middle School when that was open, and also Ernie Pyle, which unfortunately has been closed since that time. And then my high school was a Catholic school just outside Gary called Andran High School. That was my experience then. But a lot of the time for me was growing up building cardboard cars. That gave me a lot of interest not only in automobiles, but also a lot of interest in detail. In fact, my career goal at that time was to be an automotive engineer. And that was what I strove for pretty much not only through high school, but when I went off to college.
What kind of a student were you uh, while attend while attending like elementary and things like that into high school?
I would say pretty much a B student. I've had some highs, I had some lows actually. um, I would say probably the worst was I remember I actually failed a class. I actually failed a math class for a quarter,
Oh wow.
and that was hard. I never had done that before. I felt that the tests were a little bit harder than I expected, and I didn't really know how to manage that. Um, but the way that I got through that was I remember a history teacher, Mr. Clora, who was very encouraging. I did better in his class. I actually did, and even though it was a different class, that gave me enough encouragement to go back and start figuring out, that this is not the end of the world. I just have to kind of figure out how to pull out from pull my grades up within the math class. But even beyond that, my math grades were always pretty strong enough. My science was always strong enough. And I think what helped me a lot, if I had to go back and say something to myself when I was a little kid, is that a lot of times with math and science, we hear this thing about, well, math is not for me, science is not for me. And it's a little bit more about trying to imagine how to apply the material. I knew that math and science were a big part of engineering, and that helped me out in terms of really kind of figuring out how to dig in and to tackle problems. And that stuck with me throughout my lifetime. Um, and I think for me, the other area I had an interest in, I had some interest in writing as well too. In fact, that I'll share one quick side. Even though a lot of my focus was in engineering, um, there was also a part of me that wanted to be a novelist when I was a young man too. So just
Okay.
like a lot of people, I had a lot of different interests. But when I got to college, I focused on the engineering because to me, between the two of them, the discipline that you go through to be an engineer is a little different than what you do to be an author. And to me, the engineering was important. I said, okay, well, gotta get through college, gotta get this degree, gotta get these things done, these little check marks done. And I
Mm-hmm.
had to think about how these things were being applied. Where with writing, not that there's still discipline in writing, don't get me wrong. But the discipline I felt was always different and something where I could kind of do almost in solitary. Where with the engineering, you learn how to work with other people. So I focused by the time I got to college, I was really much more focused on the engineering part than anything else.
Okay. And then, did you work during high school? Like, did you have your first job then, or did it come later?
It came later. I grew up. Um, I was lucky enough to have two parents that worked. My dad was a doctor. My mom was a pharmacist, and they stressed education above all else. And they really made sure that for myself and my siblings, my sisters, that we, whether it's an A or an F, that your time is dedicated around your education. Education was paramount for them, and that to me struck me as a big deal, particularly within the Black family. A lot of times we struck the Black community in particular. I think sometimes struggles with education in a sense that we know it's very, very important, but we still see discrimination throughout each stage and each point of development. And my parents were very much stressed upon me and my sisters to kind of put the education first. So they had, in my high school days, I didn't work. When I got to college, I did do internships. I had two great internships. One was actually one, they were both through General Motors. They were both through a section of GM or division of GM called GM Powertrain. And that allowed me to take my engineering and apply my engineering studies and apply that to a particular problem. And that taught me how to work with people. Um, that part I think helped out quite a bit. Definitely the money helped out quite a bit in college, but it helped out a lot in terms of understanding how to work with people a little bit more. And I think now for young kids, I think it's important to even. And I'm not saying that work is necessarily a bad thing if you're a teenager, but it's or that's an absolute essential. But it does help a little bit in terms of trying to understand how to work with people much more quickly. And I think I would say to someone now, if you get the opportunity to work with people, do it. And if not, find other structures where you can work with people. Even a really good church with a lot of good organization needs people who can step up and be a leader and contribute. So find the opportunities out there.
Okay. And so, you mentioned your internships in college. Let's talk then about your college experience. What school did you attend, and what was the decision-making process that went into selecting that school?
Good question. My undergraduate and also my graduate, I had changed schools, and I'll explain the undergraduate a little bit. Uh, in both, I went to started off at Purdue. I was at Purdue University for about 3 years, and then I transferred over to Prairie View A&M, which is a historical Black college in Prairie View, Texas. And in both cases, I studied mechanical engineering. Purdue was a good program, but I also struggled during part of the second year and really into the third year of it academically. I did a lot of good leadership, but I also had to learn to manage projects a little differently than I had before. And when I that third year, um, that Purdue had to pause my sit down and say, hey, we will not let you continue into the next year. Basically, I was on academic suspension at that time. Um, but a neighbor of mine, whose daughter had gone to Prairie View, sat down and said, hey, I know of a really good school that you could probably attend. That would be much better to get your feet in the ground and kind of get going. And he mentioned about Prairie View. And got there during when Purdue suspends you, they suspend you for a semester. But my game plan was to just go there for a semester and continue my education. I just didn't really want to sit that out. I'm not a sit out type of person. Um, Loved it. Met some really great engineering students while at Prairie View, and loved it so much that I finished up there. So a lot of my decision making process, a lot of it initially was about, and I mentioned earlier before, the idea of studying your domain knowledge, whether it's thermodynamics, mechanics and materials, physics, any of the sciences or the math. A lot of that had to be centered around engineering for me. And it helped me to understand how do I learn the tools to be in engineering to become who I aspire to be. And that part is really important because when you struggle, A lot of times people struggle and they change programs. When I was at Purdue, I outlasted a few people who went the first year and washed out, and they changed programs into something else. There was students who I would talk to, and I would see them the second or third year. And I was like, "Hey, how's everything going? Like, which mechanical engineering class are you taking?" And they would go, "Oh, mechanical engineering. I'm not taking that anymore. I'm taking hotel and restaurant management." Um, Purdue, as much at that time, and I don't know how it is for minority recruitment now, but I know at that time that Purdue's engineering was designed to push up all the A students, all the top students they can, and then anything that was in the middle was not really encouraged into the next program.
Okay.
And I knew in my heart that I wanted to be an engineer. I knew I had what it takes, and I wasn't going to let a school dictate to me what my career path was. And I think that the thing I would tell a student now, and particularly I would tell a minority student, person of color, is have a strong idea of what you want to be and all the steps that goes into it. Because when there are problems, if you start struggling a little bit, it's just like in entrepreneurship. When you start struggling a little bit, um, not that people are necessarily against you, but there's a lot of times they don't really make a good, they don't, you need mentoring to figure out where to make adjustments. And there was a lot of times when I had to kind of, some of the mentors I needed weren't always in the spots where I needed them to be. There were times where I had to kind of figure some things out. The thing that I think that helped tie things together for me in that time was the idea that I just knew where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And I think I think gets missing when people talk about not going back to school or whether they should go to college or not, is you should have some idea of what it is that you want to study. But especially now with the cost of college and everything else, I just think it's having that drive helps you to not only get through it and be successful, but it may even help you in terms of understanding when there is a shortcoming or when something does not work out initially, and what is it that you need to be doing differently to adjust.
You mentioned your interest in cars and things like that, and that led to your selection of your major. Right, but and then also, how you went about selecting your school. But aside from the academic side of things, how was your college experience at Purdue, I guess socially, and then also at Prairie View?
Both were great, with differences though. Where Purdue was great for me was I was at a residence hall at the time called Fowler Courts. If you go to Purdue now, you won't see the dorms. All the dorms are pretty much gone. These were 1950s style homes that had. It's kind of hard to describe it without really having a picture in front, but it's had, the dorm rooms were all connected, like maybe 8 dorm rooms connected to one central bathroom, and
Okay.
then they called that a unit. And so the idea was that you were pretty much living with 15 other people, pretty much in the unit. And then you would walk outside to get to the main house where people would dine there, and they had a study section and everything else.
Oh, so it was
Um,
like an actual house with like the rooms
yes,
inside. Okay,
yeah.
got it.
So I knew a lot of people at Fowler. In fact, I'm still friends with some people this day, even on my Facebook. There's people now I adore, that I love tremendously. But a lot of the people that I got along best with were not in the engineering program. And I think for me, it was kind of bittersweet in that it let me develop as a leader. I was a residence hall president for a year. That was one of the best times. I was part of a committee that was responsible for bringing a student sexual awareness health program as a trial to Purdue at that time. Um, I'm very proud. I was very proud about that. But a lot of the leadership came to fill in. It kind of almost filled in the gaps a little bit with the engineering. And it wasn't until I got to Prairie View when that kind of switched around a little bit. Had great roommates who I'm also friends with to this day, basically. One of them I actually am Uncle Pierre to his 3 daughters. And another roommate also at that time. And Prairie View was a little different. We had dorm rooms, but we had, instead of having rooms connected to one bathroom, well, you still did, but you now had like 2 rooms rather than 8 rooms connected.
Okay.
But the brothers I met were really cool, and the thing that was a little bit more interesting was that when you got to Prairie View, first thing I'll tell you this off the bat, being at a historical Black college, I thought I was going to be the only person who came from a white college over to HCBU. And that wasn't the case. I met people who had very similar experiences to mine, where they found successes outside their program, and then came to Prairie View or even came to another HCBU to kind of to strengthen themselves up. Prairie View was a really strong engineering program, and it made a difference for me in my career, and made a difference for me in who I became, who I was struggling to become. And I think that I love both experiences for different reasons, basically. But I would still say I still consider myself more Prairie View Panther than Purdue in a lot of ways. Nothing against Purdue, but I'm more Prairie View connected with me, and that still sticks with me today. So I would say to a student now is when you pick your friends, definitely look at the people who you can associate with within a program versus people you associate outside of the program. When I was at Purdue, the people who were friendly to me were coming from different degrees and different schools, and the people who were in the engineering program really were not great study buddies. I had people that would slide, they would say, "Hey, we just got through studying," but they were not really including me in the study groups. And at that time, I kept thinking, well, okay, well, I'm still smart. I should still be able to get through that material. The problem was I also needed somebody to bounce ideas off of. And really, it wasn't until I got to Prairie View, and Prairie View, by the way, was also when I had internships as well. But it was those times I started realizing that I need to bounce ideas off of somebody. I think that's really important, particularly if you're young, because you can start understanding the material that you're learning differently than assuming that it's something that's internalized. Again, going to what I said earlier, a lot of times people think that math is not for them. It's not really a sweater. It's not a shirt or anything else. It's a tool that allows you to understand your particular domain knowledge. Same thing for science. And you need people who can who can take those tools and help you bounce those and morph them into larger ideas that do appeal to you. And that's what I needed when I got to Prairie View. In fact, the friend I mentioned about, the second friend of mine who just had his daughters too now, he and I found that we both loved Prince. We both loved, we both had 3 older sisters, and we both had shared a love for automobiles. So that was the thing that it just made it into, and he was one of my best study buddies. So we really clicked. And I think that's really important, to find people within your program whom you click with.
You mentioned that you had some internships while you were in school. What was your first job out of college?
My first job was Ford Motor Company.
Okay.
And I was an engineer. It was at that time, like I said earlier, I had an interest in automobiles and still do even now today. But at that time, I didn't get into GM for permanent. They weren't hiring the interns. They brought the interns in under the GM intern program, but they weren't hiring anybody. But Ford was. And thanks to a recruiter, I was able to start work at Ford. It was 1993. I want to say 92, but I might be wrong. But it was just in February of 93 when I started working with them. I had 8 great years with Ford Motor Company.
Between the time that you graduated from school and then moved into your internship, I'm sorry, not your internship, your first position, what was like the amount of time between that? Did you start prepping for or looking for like your post-college jobs before you graduated, or what was
It
like
was
your thought? Okay.
before, and I would tell someone now, always look before. You should not be waiting until you have a degree in hand necessarily. A lot of the appeal of students to corporate America is the fact that you are in an educational um, arena, if you will. Um, that appeal is important to them. It's the same thing when you do an MBA. We haven't had a chance to talk to the MBA part yet, but I want to jump a little bit. The reason why you go do a full-time MBA versus part-time is that full-time MBAs are seen differently than a part-time. A part-time MBA is somebody who maybe that's still good knowledge, but they may be staying with their employer. And so, but a full-time MBA, when you've left an employer to go full-time for an MBA, you've signaled to other companies that not so much that you're available, but that you are in the real thick of things a little bit, that you have more opportunity to not only understand material, but also network with other people, and then also um, get involved with other opportunities as well. So I would say my short answer is you have to, the college experience is about more than just getting the degree. It's about building the experiences that can help you either if you work for somebody, and then in a lot of ways if you work on your own as well.
How was your transition from school into the working world? Like you spoke about the process of moving into your first post-college job, but how prepared did you actually feel for your career as an engineer? Like once you got into the role, was it like, oh man, like, did you feel like thrown into the deep end, or did you feel pretty prepared coming straight from college? Was it what you expected?
Um, that's a good question. I wasn't sure what to expect. I think in some ways it was what I expected. In some ways it wasn't. I think the ways, and I know it's happening answer. But I think some of it was. I think where I didn't expect was Ford had a really good what was called the Ford College graduate program, and this was a 2-year program where once you're brought in as an engineer or an accounting position or for business, they would rotate you um, into different rotate within a 2-year period. So you have like 8 months design engineer, maybe 8 months development engineer, maybe say 8 months as a plant engineer. And the idea was for you to learn different parts of the company and how they worked. So that way, when you chose for a final assignment, it was something where um, you had some understanding of how Ford would work. That part had an appeal for me, but I think even with Ford working in Dearborn, I think it was different for me than GM because General Motors. GM and Ford and Chrysler a little bit, but definitely GM and Ford at that time were pretty much like big cities of their own, where you have where people networked with each other. Like GM had um, they had um, how can I put it? They have facilities in Saginaw, Michigan. They had a facility in Flint, a facility in Detroit. So a lot of times it was, you were in different cities. It was almost like different uh, companies. Ford was a little bit more centralized, even though they have plants in different locations and everything else. They were a little bit more centralized in some of their operations. So I think where GM was different was that you can get lost. The right mentor may not be. It can take you. This was before LinkedIn and before smartphones. This is like when Nokia was just brand new. So finding the right people was kind of not straightforward. And I think for young people now, it's easier for them to find people through LinkedIn and Meetup. There's still things you have to learn. Don't get me wrong, but definitely in terms of kind of getting a sense of who you're trying to find, you get a better sense of that now than you did in the 90s. In the 90s, it was, in fact, there was a big thing in Ford about, and GM had this too, but Ford had a thing where um, going into the plants, some engineers were a little bit hesitant as a career move because, on the one hand, management likes the fact that you have an understanding of how manufacturing is. The problem is that when you go into a plant, you still need to have a mentor on the other side who might say, "Hey, this person may be a great person. Let's bring him back to Dearborn." But if that mentor has to stay in that position like for 2 years and watch you, in some ways, and if that didn't happen, then you kind of lose a mentor, and then now you're stuck at a plant. And the
Okay.
plants are very street. I hate to, a lot of people don't realize that they can be a little street in terms of tone. and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that it was harder to climb through the corporate ladder within Ford. In Ford, you had to have had some sort of plant experience, and so it kind of became a little bit of a shell game of okay, if you go someplace, you need to make sure that somebody can mentor you. And I think that part was the one part that bothered me a lot, in all honesty, because it was hard to have someone mentor and be consistent throughout your career through that. So
Working through that, right? You said that you were at Ford for 8 years, or I believe somewhere about there.
8 years. Yep.
What led to you leaving the company? Were you looking for like a different challenge, or I guess what was the inspiration for that move?
That challenge is part of who I am today. I knew that I wanted to be a leader, and I wasn't sure if doing it within the auto industry was going to be right. What was happening was that I got out just before the recession hit at that time. Um, the concern I had was that Ford. It was a couple concerns. First of all, getting into a graduate
Sorry,
program.
just to clarify, that recession, that would have been like the 2000 recession, right? Not
Yeah,
the 2008.
2001. Yeah,
Perfect.
2001. Thank you.
Okay.
Um, um, I knew that I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to go higher into management. A lot of my mentors had been leaving Ford. That I mentioned about a little bit about that earlier. Um, and I also kind of had an interest in venture capital a little bit. I kind of knew I wanted to do something that would. I had this grand idea, and to be honest with you, it was a little bit naive in some ways. I wanted to help minority businesses by starting my own venture capital firm.
Okay.
Um, and there are people who do that though. The challenge was at that time, um, and again, part of this is because of the internet, but at that time, we really, the industries that Black businesses tend to start and thrive are usually were in industries that VCs were not looking at. But at that time, I still knew that this was something I kind of wanted to do. So there was that little part going in. Um, I knew that I was reaching a little bit of a plateau in Ford. Um, and for the education part of the reason I wanted Ford was that I also wanted to go back to school at University of Michigan. And I didn't get into their MBA program. In fact, the first two times I applied, I did not get in. MBA programs are very competitive. They're highly competitive. And I'm talking about the top 25. There's a reason why MBAs tend to get a little bit um, uh, I would say people tend to criticize it a little bit because they feel like, well, you don't need to be an entrepreneur. And that's kind of technically true, but it's also part of that is a red herring. The purpose behind an MBA is a little bit different. And for some industries, it actually behooves you to have it. For VC investment banking, you need to be an MBA. It needs to be one of the top 20. Um, so I decided that I wanted to leave Ford. That was not an easy decision. I still loved cars, but I knew that, and this goes to what finally did it, was if I had stayed in Ford, I think that recession would have hit me. Ford was, how can I put it? There's a breaking point where some people are just, hey, the people around me were kind of like, hey, stay here. I've been working for Ford for 20 years. I'll go to University of Detroit Mercy and come back. And they made the world around Ford and they didn't make it around a career. And I knew that there was more things I could learn. And so all those things kind of got together and said, okay, let's figure out what we can do. And it took a while. Like I mentioned, I spent 2 years trying to get into University of Michigan part-time because I thought that was the easiest to do. But Carnegie Mellon was the school that picked me up for full-time. And I decided to go there and dig in. So I went
Okay.
about 2000, fall of 2001.
Okay. And then we spoke about the comparison of your experiences at Purdue versus Prairie. Um, as someone that had both attended undergraduate school and then went on to get a graduate degree, how was the experience there? Not necessarily between the schools, but just the difference in the programs. Or I guess where did you find the difference between
Okay.
grad school versus undergrad?
I'll talk from I'll talk from the experiences too. One little footnote: I started at Carnegie and then ended up doing my full ended up changing to Georgia Tech as
Okay.
well. So and again, same thing, MBA. But to your question on graduate versus undergraduate, graduate is important because you in undergraduate you get a chance to learn a lot of key basic pieces. Graduate is where you focus in on, and graduate you're expected to do well. You have your grades have to be. You'll hear a lot about some programs are kind of like A, B, C, and then an F, because a lot of times it's the idea that you are in your graduate degree you should be motivated and very interested in what you study. If you're going in undergraduate, you kind of can learn. Undergraduate is a great time to take a course in, um, let's say, psychology, and you've taken all these engineering courses, or Spanish if you've never taken Spanish in your high school. Undergraduate is probably your last chance to do that with some tuning in a little bit. With graduate, you have to be very focused, and the MBA program in particular, even when you apply, it's time. And the reason why I say that is because when you do an application for a graduate program, you have to have people who will vouch for you on a recommendation. And I'll say this as a Black professional: not everybody who vouched for me. I mean, I had some really good people who vouched for me, but I had one person in particular who wrote a very lukewarm recommendation,
Mm,
and that was a little telling on me. It's basically saying, I'm not, I not that I don't believe you can do it, but I don't believe in you. And it was a little bit racially motivated. So, in fact, one friend of mine gave me a really good tip. He said, make sure that when you pick people to write recommendations, pick one person as a trial, because some people will root for you, but they can't write a recommendation to save your life. And sometimes it is, and I'll say this as a Black professional, sometimes it can be racially motivated, where that person is just sort of smiling and talking to you, but they don't really want to see you succeed. So you have to learn how to keep that piece in mind. So there's recommendations. Um, Grades are a big deal. Taking the GMAT is a big deal. And that part I also struggled with the GMAT as well. I learned over time that I do well acquiring knowledge. I still sort of struggle sometimes with tests, but it also depends on the teacher as well too. Sometimes you get great teachers and great programs that keep you engaged very well, and other times you're still struggling to meet up to the standards. But those times are really important, because in your life there will be times where you got to meet to somebody's standard to get to the next level. You
okay.
have to do that. And an MBA prepares you for that. And I think graduate school prepares you for that. And I think it prepares you in a way of that motivation I mentioned about, um, if you're going to a graduate program and you're interested in biology, you're interested in data science, you're interested in psychology, you're interested in English, um, or history, by the time you hit a graduate program, that interest needs to show in your work. And if you really are motivated, your grades will show it. That's kind of why, I'll say this for your benefit of your audience, that's why um, a lot of times you see graduate programs where it's kind of like A, B, C is almost like this is really, C average is like barely, and then it's like you can't, they have that cutoff basically. I learned that from Purdue, and that experience from Purdue got me ready from Purdue to Prairie View, got me ready with going into graduate school as well, learning that cutoff is there and respecting it, because that's part of the game, in all honesty.
Okay. And so moving past your grad school experience, let's talk a little bit about your current career. What are you working on now, and just an overview of the path that you took to get there.
Okay. Well, to explain the analytics, I know that kind of like, okay, how do we get the analytics? When I got done with my MBA, I did not get into a venture capital program, and that was probably for the best, basically. I worked at a government contractor. It was actually started by a relative of mine, a cousin. Um, And it was an opportunity to help that business get together, basically. She had pulled me over and said, "Hey, Pierre, we're trying to get a couple of things put together here." And it was a sizable business. She had about 1,500 people under her employ, and it was in government contracts. And they had some dispute basically on contracts that they were getting into. Basically, some of them were some people had signed Let's Go into these sort of contracts that were not optimal. And one of the discussions that came out of it was, how do we know that when we go to an event like these expos where you have your display and everything else, how do we know that people are coming to our website to review our material and then contact us? How do we know that the material was working from a marketing standpoint? And that introduced me to analytics. Google Analytics at that time was starting to develop. I used it to help prove out that which events were useful to continue marketing and continuing to connect the business. And that gave me an idea that working with businesses from a marketing perspective was a stronger pull than the financial perspective that I had originally thought about for VC. I kept thinking, okay, yeah, you go VC, it's about money, right? And every business wants money basically for working capital. The thing I learned was that when businesses, it's kind of almost, it's the working capital part. It's about trends. That's one part of it. And there's some trends that do not always circulate towards the Black community. So that's one part of it, or circulate as well as it should, I should say. The second part was that a lot of times when you're dealing with finances for a business, it's a lot about timing. You can find out that business legitimately needs a stronger cash flow, but if you find out too late, that business will go bankrupt because you found that you don't have enough time to turn the ship and build sales or make adjustments in costs or find the right way to make the right analysis. With marketing and with analytics, there's a stronger setup to have earlier conversations ahead of time where people can make decisions and right the ship. So that brought me to interest in analytics. And it wasn't really until 2009 when I started off on my own. I actually left Let's Go, went to an advertising company in New York. And unfortunately, that didn't work out. Got there, and then within 6 months, I was laid off. So welcome to New York. So at that point, and that was about 10 years ago. And so I decided that I needed to really kind of dig in and figure out, like, hey, if this is an idea that may work, let's see if I can figure out how to make it work. And for Zamana, that's how Zamana was born. Working with clients remote, working with them not only on their website, but also their digital marketing and on their social media, help them to kind of create a coherent marketing message.
Did you found the company by yourself or did you have a co-founder?
I found it by myself.
Okay.
This was, like I said, this was the one thing I had. I did this. If I go back and do it again, I probably would look for a partner. I just was not, there were some things I was not sure how it would work or how to tie it together, or how it would operate. I think for partners, you really have to kind of nail down those pieces, because then you can nail down who's going to be responsible for what. I made a conscious choice because that little question also was a big deal for me, not only in making choices, but also in terms of financing as well too. I really had to, this was bootstrapped from start to finish. And I really kind of felt that for me, there was an emotional, this was something I needed. This was one of those things where I felt like giving it a try was something I had to figure out how to experiment. And I felt that if things went wrong, it would be on me. And I could at least live with that. I felt like with a partner at the time, I felt that would have been damaging somebody else's life almost in some ways. There's a reason for that, but I'll save that for another time. But go ahead.
Well, actually, you can dive into it. But, I mean, if you want to share.
Yeah, when I was before I did when I was in grad school, I did an internship with Axion USA. This is a micro loan lender. They're based across the United States and I think in other parts of the world too. I think South America, if I remember correctly. They were based in Atlanta. I worked with them for a year. It was the best. This was through the AmeriCorps Vista program, and this was like the best. It was a tough year. I only made $700 a month, so it was kind of, McNuggets were kind of tight to get that thing, but it was still the best year. And one of the things I learned a lot about was we worked with small businesses on their lending and helping them figure out, what sort of small microloan that would help them. And one of the things I learned a lot about was, in terms of risk, in terms of, where people start off at. And a lot of times there is a tipping point where you take a risk when you start a business. You really do. Financially, you have to really look at credit. You have to look at, not so much just motivation, but what resources can you bring to bear quickly. The thing that I had, and that taught me a lot, but it also was a worry because when I got done with my graduate program, I got done at Georgia Tech. And remember, I had changed schools basically. One of the things I was worried about was that I had taken out, I had planned my life around one school loan. Now I was launching a business where I technically had two school loans. I still had a loan from Carnegie Mellon that I had to pay down. So I decided that if everything in my business went out for something financial, it would still be on me rather than something that might harm somebody else's life. Because when I was at Axion, I saw how people who partner up that didn't really talk about finances very well. And I'm not saying that's not an indictment on me, but I'm just saying things that got mixed up very well. I found that it was an education and an eye opener for me in terms of how do you deal with people. There's going to be a lot of people in life that you meet that you can sit and enjoy a Chicago Bulls game. You can sit and maybe have a beer or go to a ballet and enjoy their company. But when it comes to business, it comes to getting certain things done. And depending on how resources are aligned, they may not be a good fit. And so you have to pick partners with care. And if you know you have a good idea and you think you have a market, you have a pretty good shot at a market, going alone initially is not a bad idea. You just have to also know how to partner with people. And eventually that's the thing I learned to do when I was in New York. You learn a lot about partnering with people, working with them, and making it being a strong resource for clients. And that makes a big difference.
But let's actually jump back into Zamana. So you now have like your own company that you've been running now for a while, about a little bit under a decade, right? Or coming up on it.
Just coming up on a decade. Yep.
Okay. So what does an average day, if there is an average day, look like for you running Zamana?
It's been changing over the last couple of years. The first few years was pretty much, I mean, most of it was behind the laptop. There were a lot of times I had to kind of figure out where to network with people, to go to meetups. But a lot of times with analytics, what you're doing is that you are dealing with a very specific part of, it's kind of in a nexus of web design, marketing in terms of dealing with AdWords, SEO, which is where the web design part comes in. And then also social media, which has grown in usage over the last several years. And then on top of that, you have the ability of adding tags to physical media. So you can have on a place card or a physical advertising. So you're spending a lot of time with clients kind of understanding what their marketing campaigns are like, and then trying to figure out, most clients come in and say, okay, well, how can we place these tags to understand where people are seeing our marketing media, and then understanding where, what's the best course of action. So a lot of times I'm spending part of my time with kind of on the development side, helping to implement those tags. And then another part of that time sitting down with clients, reviewing what the data is telling us and helping them to understand what their options are. The tough part of what I do is that understanding of what the client's needs are. When I first started, it was very hard to get people to understand the value of SEO. And today, it's understood, but now the next step is how do we, how do we get the right questions? A lot of times those questions, or how do we get the right resources for a particular marketing campaign? And so a lot of times you're helping them to understand, what the choices are that they can use. I think social media has helped with that tremendously. It's taken the technical part out of it. Um, but I also say that the technical part has grown in the last couple of years. There's a programming language called R programming that I use now for data science and use for statistical correlation. Um, Python's also used for that as well too. But the idea is that there's now more data to correlate and play around with. Right now, I have a client that we're using Google Data Studio. We're trying to figure out how to connect the data into this dashboard. So there's a little bit more. The challenge now is that there's more options for clients, and you have to kind of corral and figure out like which options work best. In fact, right now I'm also doing a lot more development work on tools that I'm going to launch later on in the year. And those tools will help the clients a little bit in terms of doing certain calculations, doing certain tasks. So there's a little bit of, it's a mix of developer skill and mix of marketing skill that has to be brought to bear.
Let's spend a little bit of time talking about more so your philosophies and then your plans moving forward.
Okay.
So, how do you personally define success? And using that definition, if you look back over your career, and into where you are now, would you consider yourself a success?
Good question. I would say success in terms of length of time. I would say success in terms of, there's still some things I still would like to see happen, but I think you're going to find that from every entrepreneur.
Mhm.
It's kind of like, oh, I've made it. And like, oh,
But
okay,
there's more to
that
do,
next
right?
move. Yeah. so, so I would say, I think the things I think I'm more comfortable now. And I think that's part for me is successful.
Mhm.
When I first started, there's a lot of pressure, and that pressure comes from sales. You don't make sales. You don't eat. Eating is popular. So you figure out that but I think the nice thing about it is that a good business person learns how to be efficient, and there is a trend, fortunately, that has come around over the last few years. I actually have a VA now that's helping. She was a big help last year in pulling data together that I ended up using for a presentation at O'Reilly Media's OSCON over in Portland. In
Okay.
fact, this year she's going to help out again as I'm getting ready not only to do for the presentations, but also I'm writing a book for O'Reilly Media on our programming. So I think the tough part is, I think success for me was more about being more established. There's a thing about businesses that, most businesses fail after 5 years. I've been this now for twice that, so it's great to see that it's still there. Clients are still coming to Zamana and not looking to me as being the expert. Um, and I think in terms of adding people and growing people, we're working on it. There's still some things I think in terms of um, the things I would love to see happen now. When I started, JavaScript is a programming language that's used not only in analytics, but it's also used for applications as pop-up windows for Netscape. That was its original purpose. Now, developers around the world have figured out all these frameworks, Node, Angular, Meteor JavaScript is a popular one that I'm actually using now. And that's opened up the doors for a lot of different uses and possibility. Um, and now it's more of a, we need to work with people to to get those possibilities in there for Zamana. So I would say Zamana is a success from that standpoint. My next goal is to help more entrepreneurs, particularly with data science. We need more people of color working within data science, because there's a lot of things not only with data that you can do for statistical modeling and machine learning, but there's also things you can do there's a lot of social issues that are being tracked now with data that you can map out. Spatial analysis is one great area where you take data and you map out based on GPS data um, where services can be best deployed. There was a gentleman in Baltimore that used our programming to figure out to show that the Baltimore police were not to prove that they were not servicing Black communities correctly. There was another one in New York that used the same thing to help map out firearm inspections and figuring out where do we send people to inspect buildings for fire. So we are seeing more of that, and we need to have more people of color involved with it, because a lot of the traditional issues that have impacted Black communities are being mapped out, and we need to have more people as part of that dialogue. And because a lot of things are open source, there's a lot of opportunity for that. So I'm hoping to help encourage that moving forward.
Okay. And I know you mentioned a few things earlier in the interview when we were discussing your college experience, but what additional career or professional yourself or any young person, either still in school or just getting ready to enter the workforce, like looking back over your career, what guidance or sort of advice would you offer that might help them to avoid some of the mistakes you've made or achieve success a little bit earlier?
I would say a couple of things. First of all, one word. I hate to sound like that guy in the movie, The Graduate, where he tells Dustin Hoffman plastics.
Plastics.
But I would say statistics. I would definitely, a couple of things I would tell someone. Definitely, I mentioned about data science. Statistics is kind of a part of it, but it's a little, I would say, I would say from that, it's not so much just the theory, it's the idea that you can correlate things that we have not been able to correlate before in the history of mankind. And you need a little bit of that to understand what's going on. Otherwise, people can present false information to you or things that are not true. And I'll say this as a Black man. The type of racism that I've always worried about was people who were friendly to me, but when it came time for me to move forward, they were giving me false information or things that were not helpful or would not network. So I would say definitely stats, but I would also say keeping yourself informed. Definitely, when you're making career choices, don't just yell out the idea. Research it. With the internet and so many things out here now, there is no excuse to not be a well-informed person about the career you want to choose. And I would say even further, be open. Despite the fact that I was very driven, I wanted to be a car engineer when I was a kid. You could not talk me out of anything else other than being an engineer at that time. But having said that, I still had other interests. It's okay if those interests are not being nurtured at that given moment. If you remember at the very beginning, I mentioned about engineering and then writing. Well, part of the reason why I've been able to keep my business going for so long is that people have asked me to come write on marketing, on analytics. I write for 2 sites right now. And again, O'Reilly Media came to me because they saw that I could write and speak on analytics pretty well. So that writing kind of still paid in, later on. It's okay to have a couple of secondary things in mind as well. And you have to keep I think what you do is keep your skills, make them primary in your younger age. I say this for women in particular, don't be very cautious about people telling you that math is not for you or science is not for you. That's hogwash. It's not, these things are not like a shirt that you throw on and like, oh, this is my colors and this is how, this is how it should look all the time. They're not meant for that. They're tools to help you discern how to get certain things done. Even if you were an artist and you're saying, I want to start my own art studio. Well, you can still learn a little bit about math and then a little bit about accounting. So that way, you know how to manage your dollars. So that way your studio could last for a lifetime. And if you're an artist, you would want to have that happen because you want, it's a studio that's reflecting your dreams. So I would say it's great to know what you want. That's really essential because then it dictates, where you go, where you go to school, what you study. but make sure that the secondary skills that you have, don't let those fall out either. Keep your eye open for opportunities, so because it's easier to do different things, and because people are living longer, and because no one is going to do a job for 20, 30, 40 years and then retire anymore. You sometimes need to have a bunch of different skills going on, and those skills, by the way, help you in dealing with people. That's the second thing I'm going to say too. Um, you have to know how to work with other people, and that work comes from your knowledge base. It doesn't just come from, it's great to sit and chat with somebody once in a while, don't get me wrong, but as you get to be an adult, and particularly as you get older, you have to be being resourceful. People value that. They don't want to be preached to. They just want someone to, to give really good information. And sometimes that's a great way of making a friend. So I would say, again, study hard, know what you want, um, keep some secondary things in mind, because sometimes technology and life, we're in a great time right now where things are changing a little bit. Um, Study statistics, because even if you don't quite get even don't get quite all the pieces of it, you'll understand the logic that goes into it a little bit, and that might help you in make some really good smart choices early on.
Imagine it's years from now and you're nearing or already retired. When you look back over your career, what would you like to have as your legacy? And then, what accomplishments within that legacy would make you consider it a roaring success versus just mediocre or disappointing?
I think my legacy would be, I would be happy with a legacy where I encouraged other Black professionals to look at data science. Um, One part of the legacy is I got to go back and double check, but maybe speaking to the first Black person who started a web analytics services firm. There's been
Yeah.
analytics firms, but there wasn't anything like Zamana when I started. Um, and that's great that I smile about that. But to me, I didn't seek a CEO title immediately, and there was a real strategic reason for this. Um, I honestly think when you're a leader, you need to be encouraging other people. At the time when I started, it wasn't quite there yet, so I always held back a little bit. Eventually, now I'm kind of like, okay, well, I encouraged a few people. Okay, we can get going. But one of the legacies I want is being able to encourage other Black professionals to think about data science and younger people, so that way there's more people coming up. Um, that's going to be important not only for the community but also for the world, really. Um, and I think roaring success would be family, and that's something I'm working on a little bit. To be honest with you, one little caveat I want to add. Um, I had thought I'm not married right now. I thought I was going to get married before I started business, and life kind of takes its own little turns. Um, I would caution, if you do start a business, I would be think very carefully about your relationships with people in general. I made a promise to myself not to push friendships out the way when I started, because you remember when I said at the very beginning there was some uncertainty. Um, if I had ended some friendships and my business failed, that means that the business has failed and my life will have failed, because it means I pushed people away for some really awful reasons. And the thing is that when you get to be an adult, um, when you push people away, that's pretty much it. People apologize, don't get me wrong, but it can really sort of change everything. I kind of was like, okay, there's people I need to kind of hang on to. Um, if I had married, I'm pretty sure if I had married before I started the business the way I did it, now knowing now everything, I think it would have been really hard on somebody. That wasn't a choice I wanted. But I kind of had to figure out how to get things together, because I was 24 hours, go, 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 go. And that's still more like 23 hours now. But it took a while to get from 24 to 23. I would say my roaring success would be family. Um, and I would say the thing I would encourage other entrepreneurs is think carefully about making sure that you don't push people away for arbitrary stuff. Triage your arguments with people. There's some arguments you're going to have to say, hey, here's the stuff that is horrible. I'm not going to touch it. Here's the stuff that, okay, this is annoying me, but I'm not going to lose the person because of it. And here's the stuff that, okay, this shouldn't even be a thing. And hopefully that list is a very short one. If you got a long list, you're not going to be successful in business, because doing business is learning about how to work with people. And even if you're married and starting a business, that person is going to look at you. They want to see that you are not so much successful, but they want to see that you have a little bit of a life. And the first few years, I would say maybe the first 5 years, it's hard. It's hard on people, and I can see why Jeff Bezos is getting divorced. So it's hard, but you have to learn how to treat people well, and those people will be your legacy, basically, and the things that come out of it will be part of your legacy too.
Okay. And so, on a somewhat related note, you started out in Gary, Indiana. You moved around, went to, different schools, worked in different places, and you're now back in Gary. What was the inspiration behind that? Were you like just homesick, wanted to be back around family, or something
Just
else?
practical. It was more about my mom. My mom is in Gary, and we had when I was in New York, and my mom's good. My mom, her health is great. She is doing great. Um, it was a little bit, but logistics. It was hard to go. It would have had me going back and forth, and I couldn't. The one tough part about when I started was that I really triaged a lot of things in terms of expenses, and the thing that I couldn't really do very well was travel unless there was a business case for it. I mean, this is how tight this was. So what I did was and on top of that, I was waiting for another contract to come through that did not come through at the time. So that really, you have to be careful about when you seek business. The one little thing I would say to other business owners and people or young people who may be thinking about business, a big contract, it sounds great, it sounds terrific, but if it doesn't come through, it can kill your business, because you spend so much energy. You only get so many, so many pieces on the board to move around in a chess game. And if you're committing too much to one strategy, and if it doesn't work, it really can take things out. So practically, I needed to be closer to mom, so that way, if there's things that she needed, I could help out when I had a little bit of downtime. Um, that was a big part of it. And I was a little concerned coming out of New York, but to be honest with you, it was the scene in Chicago nearby was helpful. Met Emil Cambry from Blue 1647. That helped out my business, and actually, to be honest with you, it helped me in terms of networking with people. Um, so you have to know how to deal with people no matter where you go, and finally just working off a laptop. A lot of times I'm working with clients, I talk to them through a laptop. So I could be anywhere, and can work with anybody anywhere. And I think what you have to learn is, again, as you get through it, as you work through your business, you learn what's repeating in your business and what are the things that you can do to manage and bring, work with people in your personal life. Um, and you learn how to adjust. Some areas of the country are still a little better than others in terms of resources, but you learn how to make adjustments, and that's the important thing in running a business.
Okay. And then let's talk a little bit about books. Have there been any books that have inspired you along your career? Whether it's something that you read back in college, more recent, or sometime in between. Have there been any books that have inspired you, or anything that you're currently reading or have recently read that's inspired you?
Um, for reading, I don't know if inspire is the right word. It was some things that really taught me a little bit.
Or that spoke to you,
It
I
spoke to me
guess.
a little bit. Yeah, the stuff that did was more. A little bit more pragmatic. There's a great book, a venture capital book that I liked called Venture Capital Investing. I know that's a little dry, uh, but it was written by David Gladstone. I reference it a lot when I do business book reviews for Small Business Trends. But it's a favorite because he really covers the as much as he covers like the what do investors look for when they're looking at a business deck. They also look at the psychology of the entrepreneur. And there's things in there that I think that for an entrepreneur is excellent reading, because you start looking at people in a different way. Um, like I said earlier, a lot of people are great to have a whiskey with, but it takes a little bit of organization and resources and a little bit of project management, and some of that are skills that could be taught, but sometimes if you're not, some people are not tuned into it very well, and sometimes people have let their personal lives overwhelm their professional, so much to the point where they may not be a good business partner. So you have to know how to read the tea leaves and know what to look for. Um, I can say, I think other books that helped out, there was one called Service Innovation. I think I was going to say David Gladstone, that's not correct. Um, that one is a good book because it talks a little bit about how to look for innovation in services, and it teaches you how to really, it will inspire you to kind of figure out how to take a service and figure out how to tweak it to be innovative. If you look at Starbucks, for example, Starbucks, the concept of it is um, uh, from wine tastings, basically. The fact you have these different types of coffees, basically. Um, but they applied it to coffee. These type of tweaks is what people should look for when they're trying to start a business. And then after that, it was mostly about being inspired by people more than anything else. Clients I've talked to throughout the years have been probably the most inspiring because they usually are coming up. I talk a lot about analytics and data and metrics, but they have to be applied to a business strategy. And usually, when you talk to people about their business strategy, you learn a little bit about who they are. And in that process, there's some people who really had inspired me. Melinda Emerson had inspired me a lot. Anita Campbell. In fact, there's two Anitas that are important. Anita Williams, that was my cousin who started Let's Go. Learned a lot watching her. And then Anita Campbell, who was with Small Business Trends. I worked with her online, but didn't get a chance to meet her until I flew out to Las Vegas to CES one year and literally like introduced myself because I knew she was going to be out there for Small Business Trends. So you get people who inspire you because you see how they treat people, how they interact with people, and how they handle tough situations as well too. Sometimes you don't see everything because you're remote, but you get to see the output from them, and then you can kind of say, okay, yeah, I think I can imagine what went on there. Um, my mother is a big inspiration as well too. Actually, my mom and my dad. They had different ways of doing things. My mom, I think, what inspired me is that she valued education, and not like an education snob, but definitely valued it in terms of understanding how it can change your life and change how you see things, and it how it keeps you from being so. How can I put it? I don't want to say gossipy. That's not quite the right word for it. But it teaches you how to talk to people in a way that is helpful to them when it really counts. Um, like I said, a lot of people can play around and joke around with you, and it's okay to laugh around with people. That's fine. But as you get older, as an adult, you need people around you who can kind of get serious, and you have to be serious too. You can't just it can't just the whole little tip they say, oh, go find the smartest person in the room. The smartest person in the room is trying not to be the only smartest person in the room. You'll hear that piece of tip for a lot of people, and I think the problem becomes it's 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 almost like you kind of need to level yourself up a little bit, and it takes interacting with people to learn how to level yourself up on certain things. You won't level up on everything, but you need to level up on something, and that's what's going to get you through life. My mom taught me that, so I think that's important to kind of keep an eye open for that. So that's an inspiration for me.
Okay. And then, if you can you share where people can find out more about you online or connect with you online?
Sure. Zamana Analytics is on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is Zamana Analytics, very convenient. We're also on Instagram as Zamana Analytics. And then also, there's two blogs I write for, CMS Wire. I write for them, two articles a month, so you'll find me there. And then also DM News, which is a marketing was also a marketing website as well too, and I write analytics articles for them as well too.
Okay, perfect. So it was an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for joining us on today's interview.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Ah, it was amazing on my end as well. Key takeaways. Don't accept the idea that a particular subject such as math or science are something that you can't learn. They're simply tools you learn to help you get things done, not talents that you either do or don't have. Learn about these subjects from the perspective of other areas that interest you and apply their principles as needed. People place value in you being resourceful and a good source of info. This can also be a way of being or becoming a good friend. Also, while you might have a great friendship with someone, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll also be great business partners. Triage your arguments with people and ensure that you don't push anyone away for arbitrary reasons. This doesn't mean that you should never end a relationship, but you should assess your relationships and disagreements to discern if the disagreement can be overcome and if the relationship is worth saving. Thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button. I also hope you subscribe to the channel in return to get motivated, get inspired, get stories of Black history made and in the making. Until next time, take care. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you return to watch future episodes. For more information about Noir Histoire, visit the Noir Histoire website. There you'll find text, video, and audio for each episode all in one place. Subscribe to the Noir Histoire newsletter to get fresh content delivered straight to your email inbox. You can also subscribe to the Noir Histoire YouTube channel for videos. If you're enjoying the content but would prefer to listen to audio, you can subscribe to the Noir Histoire podcast. Follow Noir Histoire on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Enjoy the rest of your day.